this is part of the Kaplan Center, and we'll learn more about it as we go on. But I thought, look, we all know how tough it's been the last 3 weeks. It's our lives, our world is turned upside down. So I hope that for the next 30 minutes, an hour, however long we're together, we can talk a little bit about Kaplan, about camp, and about Israel, because that was part of our values that we talked about. So the way I'd like to get started is to go around, everybody give us a little background of where you are, what your life is like, and one thing that you remember from camp. You realize it's 21 years ago? 21 years ago. We were all a lot younger. Josh had hair, I was 20 pounds lighter, maybe 30 pounds lighter, life has changed, So I'll start off and just to say that in order to get camp started, I had to sell the idea of camp and why a Reconstructionist camp to the board. And thankfully, I had Josh's grandfather, who shared my vision and who said we really have to develop a camp that will have something that will be different. The board challenged us. The board said, there are lots of camps out there. Why do we need another camp? We can send our kids to their JCC camps. There's URJ camps. There's all kinds of wilderness camps. We can do that. Why do you feel that you need to have a camp? So my bottom line was that that Reconstructionism, particularly Kaplan, offered something that was different, offered values that were not necessarily happening at any other camp. And I said, if you want the movement to continue, we have to have a new generation of people that will grow up with these values, that will have some sense of Kaplan 20 years from now. And, it's nice to look out on the screen and see you people. So I'm going to ask you to add a little bit about, what you remember from camp about Kaplan, but I'll give you just in a minute for me. So I am basically retired at 75 years old. Oh my God, doesn't that sound? Yeah, okay. At 75 years old, I'm still skiing though. I'm still skiing and hiking and swimming pretty regularly. I work. I do some consulting for young rabbis. I was a young rabbi once, long before I met you guys. I was a young rabbi. So part of what I do now is I consult with young rabbis, and I joined a Reconstructionist synagogue in the Berkshires. So that's been fun for me. My joy, of course, is my 3-year-old granddaughter that David got to meet when he was there. Story is her name, and Ari's in finishing his PhD. Maybe if there's a Mashiach, he'll finish his PhD. So he's in Hawaii. Rachel is a somatic psychologist in Berkeley, doing important work. And right now, especially with the whole trauma of Israel, there's just a lot of, maybe you feel it in your body, but I definitely need a somatic psychologist to help me through this. And Miriam is a psychologist down in New Orleans who is very involved now in ceasefire and working hard, writing essays and op-eds for a ceasefire right now. So Sarah and I are living in Armonk, New York, and Lenox, Massachusetts, back and forth. So since Sam was the staff member when you guys, you were just young campers, but Sam was our first young staff member. So Sam, why don't you go catch us up where you are, and one thing about Kaplan that you remember from camp.
Yeah, so since then, well, Elliot Calloway, who is also a staff member that first summer, and I are still happily married, and we have two daughters. We have a 8.5-year-old Leonora and a 6-year-old and she's 6 and 2 days, Helena. She had her birthday a couple days ago. And after living in Southern California for many, many years, we took a big risk and we moved to the mountains of Northern California. So we're in Grass Valley, which is between Sacramento and Tahoe. So for those of you who remember Elliot, he loved nature, and he helped develop that love in me. And we now live somewhere where there's fall and winter and snow, and building community here. And I actually was just asked to join our synagogue board up here. So taking on that. I'm in the social work field. So I was really fortunate that in moving up here, I've been able to still work for my nonprofit and provide. Now I'm doing clinical supervision and training for new therapists with a specialization in trauma-informed care, especially with foster youth, adoptive youth, and juvenile justice impacted youth. And I think for what I remember about Kaplan, I was reflecting on the statement in the email that came, and I think Judaism had always been something that was in the past, my family culture, heritage, but being at camp and learning about Kaplan as a young adult, a whopping 18 years old counselor, Judaism became more alive. It came into the present and into the future for me. Not just something that my family was passing down to me, but something that I could engage with intellectually. So that's what I'll say on that. And I'll pass to Yael.
Okay. After graduating from university, I actually did a Masa program in Tel Aviv it was the Tikkun Olam program. So one of the values of spiritual peoplehood that I know we're going to talk about later. And then I lived internationally for about, I would say, almost 10 years. I was teaching in Turkey, which is where I met my husband. And then we were in Germany and then in Lithuania. And then we came back to Turkey while we waited for his green card to be processed. And then we came back to the States. I had my daughter. She'll be 3 in December. Her name is Aylin, which means moon halo in Turkish. I know I mentioned that earlier to some people. And I am currently in a new role. I'm the ELL interventionist at a 3rd through 5th grade. So I'm working with kids. My students are mostly from Venezuela, Afghanistan, and I'm working with them on English and integrating into, I guess, the culture of the school and the area. And I'm trying to think of something specific about Kaplan that you might have to come back to me. Because I'm just thinking about camp in general and the community building and also all the values that we were learning about, which I guess were Kaplan.
That's Kaplan.
Those are okay. Those count. And I just remember doing all the different activities that would bring his teachings alive. I'm trying to remember, there was one specific one. I know we were kind of doing different little plays with each other during those first 2 years. That's not a very specific thing, but you might have to come back to me on that one, and I will pass it on to David.
It's great to see you all. It's been far too long especially for Josh and Sam, and it's been a roundabout way. I spent some time after graduating college. I lived in Jerusalem for about 9 months. I had studied abroad in college in China and kind of caught the travel bug, the you know, explore the world bug. And so I too spent a stint abroad. I went and lived in Nanjing after I graduated and was teaching in a UCLA Global Classroom Initiative for Chinese high school students who are interested in coming to the US to study. And during my time there, I also had the good fortune of being able to travel around a bit, stretch my legs, and got to see a lot of China, but also Southeast Asia. And it seemed like everywhere we landed, there were democratic protests popping off, and that it's, framed a lot of how I was thinking about the region and things I was interested in. And so I wound up coming back to the US in 2016. There were intermittent summers spent at camp, which was wonderful. I got to do a few trips to Israel in there as well. I spent a year and a half working for the Simon Wiesenthal Center in New York. I was kind of shaken by what went on in Charlottesville, so I was called to that for a stint, and then I was applying to graduate programs. In the meanwhile, I got accepted to Georgetown and did a master's of Asian studies with a focus on politics and security. And then, like a lot of folks who go to the School of Foreign Service, decided to get into the national security space, and I currently work for the federal government doing foreign policy analysis. And that's how I wound up in Hawaii.
And you're not alone.
And I'm not alone. I have a wonderful fiance, soon to be bride. So we're in the midst of wedding planning. Yeah, it's all happening. I think we're very excited to be married, less excited to be wedding planning. But everything's going well. And in terms of values of spiritual peoplehood, I remember distinctly Rabbi Eitan somehow conflate Rabbi Kaplan with the Colonel and a bucket of values and or chicken. But in terms of instilling a sense of community and understanding how tradition and modernity can be merged, and how we have a foothold in both the past and the present, and getting finding a way to merge those two aspects of ourselves and broader community has definitely been something that I've grappled with, dealt with, thought about a lot, and has impacted my life till now. Passing it along.
Hey, really wonderful to see everybody. David, did you say you're in Hawaii? Is that right? Oh, cool.
Shaloha.
That's exciting. All right. After college. So I married Rabbi Beck Richmond, Camp, also alumna. We started dating as counselors in 2009 and did the long distance thing for 3-ish years, Boston to Oberlin. And then I moved out to Boston and I worked at the Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies, doing like sociology and demography research on the American Jewish community. And that set me on the trajectory kind of for the rest of what I did. I studied English at Oberlin, and this institute got me into doing quantitative work. And Beck and I moved to Haifa and did Ulpan for 6 months in Haifa, and then bicycled across the United States. And then, Rabbi Jeff, to your point, and then I essentially started my PhD at that point, and I just finished in August. So it happens. People do deposit their dissertations and they finish them. It happens. So I did a PhD in urban planning at Penn, at University of Pennsylvania. I was in Philadelphia for like 7 years, on and off, in like a really beautiful, thick Jewish community in West Philadelphia, and in a very deep soul searching time during like the peak of COVID. Beck and I decided that it was time to move back to the upper Midwest, that the East Coast was not tenable for the life that we wanted to live anymore because of a lot of different factors, cost of living being a huge one. And we moved back to Cleveland. And then after moving back here, I got a tenure track position at Oberlin in statistics. So this was like this unbelievable, very lucky, fortuitous thing. And then right behind me is Beck's studio. So Beck's a Sephirot now. And so that's why there's a Sefer Torah rolled in the back and a bunch of really intense rubbing alcohols, all for like cleaning and preparing stuff. So, and I guess there's two Sefer Torah in the back. Yeah, so that's what we're up to now. We live in this big cooperative house in Cleveland Heights, and I teach at Oberlin. There's two families, like each of us on sides of the duplex, and we all raise our kids together. I have a almost 5-year-old Netta and a 19-month-old Adar. And yeah, they both go to the same school that I went to growing up, which is pretty wild. And then, yeah, in terms of the values of spiritual peoplehood, the biggest thing, I was going to talk about the Kaplan's famous creamery thing too, David. That was the first thing that came to my mind was Rabbi Eitan. Not the Colonel. I sometimes mix up Kaplan with Rabbi Eitan in my head. That's the one that gets twisted. And I'm like, no, he didn't write Judaism as a Civilization. That's not, hold on. But the big thing that comes to me is not even necessarily one of the, there were 7 of them. Jeff, is that right? 7 values?
6, 7, yeah. Right.
Yeah. Not as necessarily a single one of them, but what I realized is this fundamental thing that I think all of us got from camp that was not necessarily hammered home in other spaces, which was that like by being part of this Jewish thing, you were like bound up with a people. It wasn't just like a set of religious practices that you were taking on or a set of like cultural tropes that you were taking part in, like reading or cinema or whatever, but that there was like this like thing that you were part of that transcended all of that and connected you with like people who didn't look anything like you, who didn't speak the same language as you, who lived at the opposite side of the world from you, but you were all part of this like thick network. And that's something that really held me like I'm like a whole lot more religiously observant than I was when I was at camp. But in between camp and this period of my life now was a big trough of observance. And I think that the concept of these values of Jewish people had held me because I was able to fall back on something even when my like faith or like my emunah was not as high. And I feel very grateful for that because it kept me in the fold in a pretty dynamic way.
Thanks, Josh. Thank all of you. That was really good. It's a nice way to catch up, and it's a nice way for you to bring Kaplan into our story. So I think, Josh, what you were talking about was the idea of Kehillah. What does it mean to really have a community? And yes, that was something, I think all camps do that. But that we were really trying to do that. I should give you a little background, you campers, and that is that when our staff first met, and maybe Samantha, you remember this, when we first met, we were each day we had a different concentric circle of how are we presenting the values of spiritual peoplehood? How will it impact? What kind of culture do we want to have at camp? And we really had Kaplan at the forefront of all of this. Although maybe you remember Jenny Goldfried. She was the first year. She was a rabbinical student who went on to study at Leo Beck College in England. But she's the one who came up with the symbols of the values of spiritual peoplehood, which, we were trying to think, okay, how do we present these values? And will the kids be bored to death with it? Because after all, who likes to talk about values? And Jenny, was able to capture something that was really important. And maybe you guys remember it. When I say values of spiritual peoplehood, what do you do? Right. And each one of those things became so important. So just a quick review, okay? The first one, in no particular order, all right? And by the way, Kaplan only had 3 or 4 of them I added some more, because it was camp and you could do that, and why not? I wanted to do values, and one of the most exciting things were Isaac and I, after year 2, presented a program about the values of spiritual peoplehood, and we did values trail mix. Each of the values had, you all remember those things, and I remember there was a professor from Brandeis who came out of our session saying, who presents values of camp with ice cream and trail mix and all this stuff? And they got it. And a lot of camps after that started to realize that we needed to somehow inculcate the values that were part of the vision of what their camp was. And I have to say that I think that was one of the things that JRF did with Kaplan's values. So let's just go over them quickly, okay? In no particular order, and you do the symbols, okay? Chokhmah, wisdom. All right, yeah, okay, right, all right. That we figured, okay, we've got to teach the kids something. Camp has to have some kind of education. Oh, and here's another thing too. Remember, we didn't have an art program. We didn't have a athletic program. We went swimming. At the end of the day, this is Babka who's jumping on me here. So we focused all of our stuff on these values. So, Yael, you mentioned the Chorsha, the grove. Well, in the morning we went over what the value of the day was. And at Mariv, we did the same thing. When the rabbis, when rabbis started to come to camp, they said, Jeff, what are you doing? You can't daven twice a day. That's not what camp. I said, no, we're not davening. We're coming together as Kehillah and we're learning together. So they got it, but it changed quite a bit. So Chachma was wisdom. Then we had Hidur Mitzvah. What was that?
Eza Yofi.
Eza Yofi, right. Eza Yofi. Because so we had a chance to make, and do you remember our first year? What Eitan helped bring this project? Do you remember what a really important thing was? We did taluses. We made all those beautiful taluses that they still have today at camp, and we tied the tzitzit. And it was great. And we had the value of tying ropes together. We were all in Dessa, remember, or wherever that room was. There were 39 of us, so we could do everything.
Air conditioning.
It was air conditioned too. And I remember we all got sick. Remember, everyone.
It was my fault, Rabbi Jeff. I brought it.
You brought it
from Cleveland. I arrived sick, and then it ripped through everybody.
It went through everybody.
And Angelo Ribbler was the last one who got 3 days before we left camp. Yeah. Sorry.
I just saw where Angela just got married last month too. Yeah. So that's nice. All right. Another thing was Kedusha. What's Kedusha? You remember? We're looking for spirituality. So what do you remember about camp that had a Kaplan value of spirituality? Anybody?
I feel like the whole thing that we did on Shabbat, right? Like the processional thing and everybody wearing white and all that, which I know that's not necessarily unique to JRF.
Right.
But that was definitely there was a palpable sense of there was this differentiation in time thing and creating sacred space. That's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Good, thanks. Anything else that Kaplanian for you?
Well, there was a lot of camper-led services too. I remember Josh and David Streif, they led a Bob Marley tune in replace of something related, one of the
Chamocha, right?
Yeah.
I still remember that. Yeah.
And that it was the Chanichim leading and using things that spoke to them spiritually.
Yeah, El, I remember your voice. That was special for me to have Chanichim that really could touch me, because music was always important to me, and your voice was just something that really spoke to me back in those days. I remember I was trying to get you to go to cantorial school at one time. So
I remember.
yeah.
No, I mean, for sure, the musicality of camp in general, like all of our services, it was just, that was always something that for me always made me feel very connected, that it was not just like saying the blessings, but I feel like there was a musicality to everything.
Yeah, right.
What there was also something that was like it was like super like this weird like Venn diagram between really magical and really intense that first summer, right? Of there being 39 of us. I remember as a kid even feeling like I was kind of part of this like experiment, and that like we were part of something really special. And I mean, yeah, I don't even remember the name for that place until you said Khorsha. And I was like, that to me is like the light coming through those trees and us, that this like small group where everybody knew everybody at that point. I think that was like a very, very holy.
Yeah, great. I think thanks, Josh, because that's Kedusha too. It was that place. We also, we try to make nature a part of it, too. That there was going to be music, there was going to be nature, there was going to be pounding on drums. There were different things. Samantha has a picture of Yael putting tefillin on. It showed up. Can you show it again? You have it there? Because Josh didn't see it. But we were that made, by the way, no camps were having women putting tefillin on, So that was really, we were exploring what the future of Reconstructionism and of Kaplan could be, and I wasn't sure, I didn't know what the magic would be, and how you guys would help do it. Josh, you're part of this next one. The next value that I'm going to bring up is Derech Eretz. Well, you remember Derech Eretz, everybody? What was the symbol of Derech Eretz?
Zaya Mensch.
Yeah, right. Zaya Mensch, be a Mensch. And Josh, in year two, and Isaac would quote this. Year two, there were somebody was not behaving in a particular nice fashion towards somebody else, and you went up to that kid and you said, "We don't do that at Camp JRF." Do you remember?
Vaguely, yeah.
And Isaac heard that, and he used that as one of the. Remember, Isaac wasn't with us year one; he was with us year two, and that was one of the themes that that here was a Kaplan value that he observed you as a second-year camper, you an old timer, trying to tell somebody that that's not the way we behave here. There really is a value in what we do. And then, of course, Tikkun Olam. Do you remember? Yeah, good. Yeah, right. So, and do you remember what that's from, Yael?
No.
That was a song. That was a song that had Tikkun Olam in it, L'taken et ha'olam, that we're gonna fix this world. And I think we tried to, it was a little harder to do that because you were in an isolated community. But I think Tikkun Olam was something that, especially back in the beginning of the camp, that most campers, most Kanichim, were really aware of what a Tikkun Olam project would be. I mean, we all did it for our bar bat mitzvahs, so that was important. And of course, I wanted to save this one for last because this is the hardest one, and that was Tzianut, and I had to change it as years went on to Ahavat Yisrael, that love of Israel, and not just the hummus and pita that we would always have when we would do that, but how do the children of Hagar and Avraham, of Isaac and Ishmael, how do they somehow come together? And throughout the movement, that was the one thing. But I have to say, I studied with Kaplan in Jerusalem. Oh, you didn't know I was that old. But in 1974 and 75, I lived around the corner from him in Jerusalem. And every Wednesday afternoon, I would go to his apartment, his home, and study with him. And Kaplan very much believed that that unless we recognize that the Arabs/Palestinians are our neighbors, that there would never really be the kind of state of Israel and the state of Palestine that he wanted. So that was really something that became a problem, for me as I presented it to the movement. What are some values of Tzianut that you can recall from camp? Something. Mostly for me, it was the shlichim. We always had these wonderful, committed Israelis who did their Israeli service, their army service, and now were coming to us. So, how about a memory of something that you learned from?
Definitely the connection with the shlichim. I remember when I went to Israel for my Masa program, I was still in touch with a lot of them. Ori, Ehud, I don't know. And I actually went and saw a bunch of them while I was there throughout my time. And it was nice to have this connection to more people in Israel that I felt, were like almost like family. Like I knew them from that special time at camp. And we could continue that relationship when I was with them too in person.
Yeah, I think I did Thanksgiving with Natalie and Ayel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just, I had not much other plans besides seeing family, and it was just wonderful to spend that time together. And even though we hadn't seen each other in, quite some time.
Yeah, I'll say Natalie and Ayal is my touch point too, David. When we moved to Haifa, they were living in Kiryat Motzkin, like in the suburbs of Haifa.
Yeah.
Like, Haifa is notorious for having no Americans in it, like at all. And we didn't know anyone. It was Beck and I by ourselves in Ulpan with like a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds from France and a bunch of 20-something-year-olds from Ukraine who were all fleeing whatever wretched conflicts were at that point in 2014 and 15. And yeah, that was it. And I mean, David, I saw your sister on that same time, also with Natalie and Ayal, like ran into Rachel, and like and this whole camp group. So they had sort of like, it was amazing. Like Natalie and Ayal had sort of like built this sort of like satellite thing there of like taking in folks. And that was really special. I think for me, it almost connected more years out from camp than in the exact like moment while I was there as a camper. It was more so that I think even as staff and as an adult that the connections like felt more rich.
Definitely.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's certainly the relationships with individual people, and many of which I still have today. But I think also talking about Israel at camp allowed for a much more nuanced and broader perspective when it comes to Israel, and this idea of both and, not either or. And I think that's something, especially right now in this moment in history, that I really value and appreciate the nuance of how we talked about Israel and how we engaged with the land. And I think that's something really special that we did at camp.
Totally agree.
And I think it wasn't just, I think as following in Kaplan's vision that we really challenged ourselves as staff, as chanichim, what Israel would mean to us, and what was fair, what does it mean to have Palestinian neighbors, I was on the phone. I was on a Zoom call this morning with a Palestinian that I met last year when I went with a number of Reconstructionist rabbis to do an Israel-Palestine trip, and and knowing people, not just Israelis but Palestinians the whole process and the pain of what's happening right now becomes even more personal. I've been in touch with Ruvik, Ruvik, who's just 2 years younger than me. Two of his sons now are down in Gaza, ready to go in. And I've been in touch with Gary, and Gary's 3 kids are all ready, to go into. I mean, so those powerful moments of having the shlichim, as part of our lives, I think have really made a difference personally for me, and it sounds like for you guys too, that it really has done something too.
Let me just add quick one thing too, which is that Sam, to your point, I think you're totally right. Like the both and thing. I don't remember what we called it, Yom Yisrael or whatever it was called. That one day that we'd have, right, where it was like all devoted to it. That one of the last things we did that day was a session that Ezra Weinberg led about whether or not Hatikva should be the national anthem, because Arab citizens of Israel might not be able to connect to it as a national anthem, right? And that was that didn't feel like an out of left field conversation in the context of Camp JRF. That just felt like what we were doing. And like when I talked to my friends who went to other camps, like some of the more intense places, the word Palestinian was like not said, right? Or B, to actually engage with that as a real question it wasn't dealt with, right? And I think it was active and front and center in how we were engaging with the place, which I also think just made it, I mean, at least for me, it was much less of a crisis of consciousness when you got to college and there were people who were critical of Israel, and you're like, okay, this is not like, oh my God, how could, that whole kind of thing that people talk about. So.
And
I specifically remember having a deep discourse with you, Josh, at Henry Horner about the conflict and getting into historical narratives, and it was a very in-depth conversation for a bunch of 13, 14-year-olds,
12 and 13-year-olds or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I think it also extended into our first trip to Israel, right? We were the ones that went on that first trip, and just, I mean, I still have this memory because the first time I went on an organized trip was Chicago has some, I don't know if they still do it, where post B'nai Mitzvah. David, were you on that with me? What was it called? Tom Israel. They send you, and if you go, you're promising to continue Hebrew school or something. And when we went, I think it was during the Second Intifada, so we didn't go to Jerusalem. And I will never forget with camp, I remember we were driving into Jerusalem and they just started blasting Matisyahu's Jerusalem. And I was just it was this this moment that I will never forget. And I just, continuing with that trip and then my Masa program later, I feel we got into conversations that, like Josh said, other camps or other groups that went on these trips maybe don't dive into. And I mean, that stuck with me for sure.
Well, so let's continue that a little bit. And what values of Kaplan do you think that you took from camp and brought to your present day life? I mean, so that's an example, and I want to name it as something that's Kaplan, and you've taken that and it moved with you. It's part of you. Are there things that you feel that you've taken from camp that are part of your modern day life that you really feel are a basis for things that you believe, things that you do, things that you work towards? I know that's a little amorphous, but anything from camp that's a value that is part of your life today.
I mean, I think there was, Tikkun Olam was something that was deeply inculcated, and there was a zeal that I think was instilled in all of us at camp. And as I went into college and beyond, for me, it was how do I understand this world? How can I understand the forces within it, in order to proceed and try to have any sort of bearing on making it a better place, right? And so foreign policy is, a messy business inherently. It's not, uh, it's not easy. It's a very stressful and difficult process, especially when there are, multiple viewpoints and multiple divergences in terms of how we live and exist together. And I think the discussions that we have, the ideas about what do we want out of the world that we inhabit, I think those definitely were readily available in my back pocket as I kind of move forward out of camp.
Great.
I agree with the Tikkun Olam. Actually, sorry, I've mentioned it multiple times. The Masad program that I did, Aliza Schwartz had done it before. Amy Goldsmith had also done it before. And it was very much, there were 2 tracks. There was, I don't remember the other one, but my track that I worked on was, we were talking again about, connections and between Arab Israelis, Palestinians, and Jewish Israelis. And there were just so many experiences that I had on that program that, like just seeing different perspectives, like that we're all people, first of all, right? And just that, like, being aware that there are other perspectives and it's okay, and listening to each other. I think that also continued into post camp and Tikkun Olam. I went to I was like the only Jewish kid at the university I went to, and just being open to expressing like what Judaism is in different ways, what it means to me was also, I feel like having that strong foundation at camp made me feel comfortable in expressing that to people that maybe had never met a Jewish person before, or having those kinds of experiences, which were very different from growing up in Evanston, where the majority of my friends were Jewish.
Hey.
David.
So I did get to see Amy Goldsmith when she was in Yafo on the Masad program. So I got to visit her there once. Yeah.
Amy's my neighbor now. This is the crazy thing.
Oh.
Amy came over to our house for a Sukkot open house party. She lives in Shaker Heights with her like wonderful husband. She's expecting, Shatova. And yeah, so I see Amy a fair bit. It's great. I always introduce her to everybody as my first boss. That's the
Well, since we're having the next generation of kids, and my granddaughter's in that too, and so for a couple of sessions, Samantha and her kids were on a Shabbos program that we were doing. I think we have to reinstate it. I think that it's time to do some camp music with the next generations. Okay, so we'll start it with the young ones. One piece, there was one piece from the Kaplan diaries that I did in the when we were in the Poconos, and I read this one track from a Kaplan diary in the 1930s, and Kaplan goes to visit his daughter, Judith Kaplan Eisenstein. You all know her as the first bat mitzvah, but she's teaching prayers at Camp Modin, which was up in Maine, and Kaplan comes and he sees his daughter teaching, and he says, "These kids won't get it. It's just ritualistic mumbo jumbo." That he would always say that. That was his thing. That means absolutely nothing to them. There's no way you're going to have kids learn prayers and that it'll ever be meaningful. And I remember reading it. I think you guys were still campers, not Samantha, but I think the three of you were still campers. And I said, if Rabbi Kaplan came in, right now, well, what would you say to him about this entry that he put in the diary? And do you guys remember? Okay, you were young. Who knows? most of the kids said that they challenged Rabbi Kaplan. They said, no, this is meaningful to us. We're not just doing Hebrew ritual mumbo jumbo. We're taking an opportunity to praise nature. We're being thankful in the Modeh, Moda, Ani. We're looking at prayers in a different way. And they said to Kaplan that they disagreed with what he wrote, you know, in the diary. And I was so proud. You know, that was the moment for me that you know, that said it all. That you know, that Kaplan was overturned by you people because of what you were doing in camp. And that was really, really very important to me.
I think one of the things that has stayed with me and influenced me the longest is his idea of values-based decision making, and whether it was the camp community that we were creating and how we were going to practice and do things, or how I was as a graduate student, or how I am as a therapist, or in the community I live in now, that coming back to, especially when I feel lost, what are the values that I hold dear, and that always helps ground me and to find a way forward. And I think that's something that really came to life at camp.
Great. Thank you, Samantha. Yeah. Are there things, are you guys familiar with the Kaplan Center? So the Kaplan Center was started by Dan Cederbaum, Zichrono Livracha, you know, and you all know Dan because he was the president of JRF at the time that camp got started. You know, Jacob and Sammy were at camp with us. It was really important for Dan to keep Kaplan's thought and philosophy and teaching separate from Reconstructionism. It didn't have to be part of it. And you know, Kaplan's yahrzeit this past year, Kaplan's been dead for 40 years. Even now into the 21st century, we have found that his work and his idea about Judaism, things that you all mentioned, you know, are really part of you know, what's creating even a present day Judaism, you know, through the Tikkun Olam that you mentioned, through Kedusha, through Chochmah, all of those things that you mentioned today, you know, that those things come alive. Are there things, this is a harder question, are there things that you might want to learn about Kaplan, you know, in today or in the future? Something that maybe you've heard about Kaplan, or how you'd like to maybe express even more? This is a difficult one.
I mean, the biggest thing that I would love is that there be some space to actually study his work, right? Like, I mean, at least as it's been communicated to me, that his writing is a little bit impenetrable at points.
That's it, right. Nicely said, right.
Which is hard, but like that's always, I think, the glaring thing is that we got the ideas, but I never really had a ton of exposure to the primary sources. So would be, I think, a cool thing. Like the Reconstructionist community in Cleveland started as like a Kaplanian reading group. They were just like reading Kaplan in Jeffrey Schein's, you know, living room or whatever, right? But that to me is like the biggest one. It's just like, what's the door in the least impenetrable of the work to like start thinking about it? That for me would be the coolest.
Great, thanks, Josh. That's terrific. What you do know that this, with your permission, this now will be on the Kaplan website. So people will come and watch us and say, oh, I need to find out more about Kaplan, because these brilliant young people, you know, gave me the door. But as Josh said, some of his reading is pretty thick, you know, but we can handle it. I think that was maybe my job at camp, was to make it Kaplan light. So that you could step into the door and find out about the philosophy and the Judaism that he was creating.
Kind of, you know, on that note, and I think you touched on a line of thought previously about how things that we were doing at camp, became things that other camps looked at and adopted. But in terms of, I think for me, it would be interesting to see some sort of researcher writing in terms of how Kaplan's thoughts have now proliferated very broadly within pluralistic secular, Judaism. I've sat in high holiday services at a conservative congregation in DC last year, and I was, it's like I'm seeing the lines, seeing the connections, and it's interesting to see how these other movements are there's a convergence there, and I think there's some attribution that I think would be worthwhile to document just for the sake of liberal Judaism.
Great, thank you, David. Well, so it's almost an hour, and I'm a little hot, so I thought I'd take off my. You knew it would have to come, right? Right. So, right, it's my chalutzim. So that's our year, guys. So how about if Samantha asked me to do this, so I think we need to do it. Od yavo shalom aleinu. Od yavo shalom aleinu. Od yavo shalom aleinu.
Kulam.
Od yavo shalom aleinu. Od yavo shalom aleinu.
Od yavo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam.
Salam. Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam.
Salam. 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 Aleinu. Salam. Salam.
May there be salam. May we find shalom. And it was wonderful being with you guys, really. Just so terrific. I want to do this every week. You know.
That's good.
So, any Parthian shots? Anything else you'd like to add to what we've just?
I want to. The one thing I just want to add, which I know that this is Kaplanian, this is something that Steve Seeger said, Rabbi Steve said, as something I was at recently, which I think is like totally, I feel it, is that like what we were all doing together, I don't think we really fully recognized how countercultural it was, right? And that counterculturalness at least has really stuck with me in the way that I've shaped my life as I became an adult, right? And the like loneliness and isolation and lack of community that I see amongst so many of my peers in my generation, what camp was doing and what Reconstructionist Judaism and I think Jewish life period really pushed hard against that and sort of like insisted that like there's something beyond like you and your job, and that something is community, right? And it's worth fighting for this thing even when everything else around you is like doesn't have language for it. So that's, I think that I think that's I guess my parting thought is like that's the thing that's really stuck with me the most as I've become an adult. Is the Kihiwa part. And totally, yeah. Sorry, not to get too dramatic.
And you started with that too, Josh. That's how you began too. So
right.
I like the way you.
Well, just to add to that, I mean, the community of camp is so special. I mean, we see each other not that often, and it's like picking up right back where you started. And I think that will always be like that. It would actually be really cool to get all 39 on a Zoom call one day.
That'd be amazing.
Plus the counselors.
Thanks.
All right. We need Samantha. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we did an hour. I think that's great. You'll be able to view this. Send all your family and friends to watch us on the website about Kaplan and Camp. All right, Isaac.